we've put this workshop together by, we're a group of educators and you'll meet them online in a little while. And we've designed it to work both for on-site and online participants. And the idea is to give opportunities for people who aren't necessarily here at the conference to share in some of the topics and themes, and also for people who are not here as participants to have a flavor of the conference as well. So in order to stimulate some discussion, two of our facilitators, Paul and Taskeen, have written some publications, and we'd like to invite you as workshop participants to use the publications. We'll assign some to groups and respond to a particular question, and we'll go through that in a little while. Christian, do you want to put the slides on? Thank you.
Yes, I'm happy to.
Okay, thank you. So for those of you who are joining us online, you'll be able to go into breakout rooms in Zoom, and for those of us here, we'll break into a few groups as well, and then we'll all come back together to share perspectives. Okay, so slide 2, please. Okay, so how is this workshop going to work? We're going to do some introductions from the facilitators, and then we're going to just have a very brief framing of some of the themes we want to talk about and why, and also a little bit about the process. And then we're going to introduce the provocations, and then we'll break into some small discussions, and then we'll do some feedback. Slide 3, please. Okay, and if you have got a device here, you're welcome to go to that URL there, towards-openness.org/Wikimania, and that's got the outline for this particular workshop. Okay, next slide. Okay, so we're going to just introduce ourselves as the facilitators. So I'll go first. So my name is Sakina Walji, and I work at the University of Cape Town. And my interest in exploring some of the themes around this workshop has come from my work in open education, and some of the strategies of open education, such as open educational resources, that's freely licensed content, MOOCs, and open textbooks, and some of those strategies that we are all grappling with, which could be a response to opening up access to educational opportunities, especially in the Global South. Chris, who is my colleague here, he's going to also introduce himself.
Hi everyone, my name is Chris. I'm
Okay, and then Christian will hand over to the online facilitator to introduce himself. You might want to not share the screen.
Yeah. Hold on, I'll just stop sharing so that you can see us when we speak. I hope that's the case now. Hi everyone, my name is Christian. I'm the Education and Science Advisor to Wikimedia Deutschland, or Germany as they would say, but I'm also many other things. I'm just glad to be here in this workshop to ask some questions about open and also the open movement in general, I guess.
Hi everybody, I'm Mahabeli. I'm in Cairo right now. I'm from the American University in Cairo. And I'm interested in open education in a lot of different ways. But mostly I'm interested in the way open educational practices can be helpful for people in the Global South, but I'm also critical of a lot of discourses of open education. So I'm interested in, I also heard the term Ubuntu a few years ago. It's not, I'm from Africa, but it's not a term that we use here in Egypt. So I was very curious about the use of it, and that's why I'm here in this workshop.
Hi everyone, I'm Taskeen. I'm from South Africa, but I'm currently living in the UK, so I'm very envious of all of you who are in my country right now. I'm doing my PhD at the moment, and I'm looking at like online education and how it can support marginalized groups, but also through a critical lens in terms of digital neocolonialism and power dynamics and those aspects of online interactions.
A very early good morning from Vancouver, Canada. My name is Rajiv Jangiani, where I work at Quantum Polytechnic University. I'm a psychology instructor here, as well as the special advisor to the provost on open education, supporting open education at the institution, but increasingly building networks across institutions. Delighted to be MEN.
Okay. Are we done with the virtual introductions? Yeah. Okay.
I think we are. I don't want to interrupt anyone. We have lots of virtual participants who, if we introduce them all and they introduce themselves about all they, I think we would take up all of the session time. So it's our first opportunity not to be inclusive here. I'm sorry about that.
That's great. Okay. So if we can go back to the slides. So we talked a little bit about where we are. The theme of open education seems to be a connecting one. And in fact, when we were thinking about the theme of this conference and responding to it and putting together a presentation, after some deliberation as a group, we decided to structure the workshop to examine the conference theme of Ubuntu and its application to the practice of knowledge sharing, and how this might be more troubling than initially thought. And that's where we want to open up some of the discussions today. And some of the concerns, questions we had when we thought, why is this the theme of this particular conference? And we'll share some of what's emerged in our deliberations, and that's the inspiration for this particular workshop. So we're just going to spend a little bit of time talking about perhaps speaking to that theme before we move to the provocation. So I'm going to hand over to Taskeen and Maha, who will talk us through these. Thanks.
Okay, hi. I hope you guys can hear me well. So in terms of unpacking Ubuntu, I'm no expert, and so you're welcome to challenge anything that I say. And actually, that's what the purpose of the session is. But Ubuntu comes from the Nguni term, and I think the best phrase that is used to describe is Umuntu ngumuntu angabantu, and that means a person is a person to other people. It's this idea of respecting everyone and having and them respecting your values and sort of living in this communitarian understanding. However, I think Ubuntu is often translated as something that's just love and harmony, and a lot of it can be Ubuntu washed, if I may say. And so a lot of the Ubuntu discourse can be challenged, and most of that comes from looking at Ubuntu in terms of its pre-colonial understanding versus how it's used in a more post-colonial philosophy, and the fact that the term now has been used ahistorically or decontextualized, and also just placing Ubuntu within the political context and understanding whether it's been created in order to form this sort of rainbow nation ideology, and what are the politics around that. And then there's also other discourses around feminist critiques or understandings of patriarchy within Ubuntu that also come up. But yeah, that'll definitely be things that we'll be unpacking today.
And as someone whose culture is sometimes seen as, that there are particular words that have particular meanings, I don't think this is always true. So in my own culture, there are a lot of words that people tend to think has one authoritative meaning that doesn't. So I was wondering, why do we assume that there's one authoritative understanding of Ubuntu, and who decides what that authoritative meaning is? And I think that would apply to a lot of things that we take from cultures other than on our own. Next slide, Christian. And one of the major criticisms against the use of Ubuntu by politicians and theologians alike was how it's been used to Ubuntu wash the immense atrocities of the apartheid in South Africa. And so, and this is one of the concerns that I think Taskeen is going to elaborate on in her provocation. Next one is you, Christian.
Christian, you're muted.
You're muted, Christian.
Yeah, I think you can hear me now, right?
Yeah.
I double unmuted myself. I'm sorry about that. So when we think about what Taskeen and Maha just mentioned, then one has to ask themselves what it actually means, and when you use terms like Ubuntu as a rallying call for a Wikimedia conference. So does that mean that we're perpetuating a romanticized view of a concept that actually challenges structural inequalities and injustices? So that's one of the starting points actually for our workshop, I think, in general, both as maybe a lens for the provocations that we're about to offer, but also for the group discussion that we hope to facilitate later on.
And then just another angle in terms of Ubuntu, in terms of its post-colonial understanding, is whether Ubuntu has been now Christianized into understanding it as something that's mainly about forgiveness, but doesn't acknowledge repentance or reparations, and how that fits into the post-apartheid context in terms of like discussions that are going on now in terms of land reparations, or giving back to people what they deserve or what was taken from them, versus just forgiving and forgetting and moving on. So this Ubuntu discourse once again plays a lot into the political understanding right now.
And then back to this, who gets to decide what is the definitive meaning? When we talk about open and free, there's so many different meanings for that. I mean, over here, we're just listing a lot of these different open licenses, but even open education has a lot of different meanings to each of us. And what do we mean by free? And again, there's so many different understandings of the word free, and just the fact that we use it together doesn't mean that we all agree on the same thing. And who's we? Who gets to decide which of these terms gets used more often? And who gets to decide which ones are ignored or put in the background? Next.
So here it's me again, and part of the concept of this workshop is that we'll try and kick off the group conversation and the group work by reading you provocations. And the first one provocation that we're about to read, or that I'm about to read in this case, is by Paul Prinsloo. Just have to jump to the right window here. Hold on just a second, here it is. And I'll just read this real quick, so it shouldn't take longer than 2 or 3 minutes, so bear with me, please. His provocation starts: I have 3 Chinese symbols as tattoos. The rationale for having Chinese symbols was that I wanted to have markers on my body to celebrate, commemorate significant events in my life. So the symbol under my right arm means determination to the end. The one on the left arm means I will not surrender, and the one at the back of my neck means buffalo, a symbol of strength, tenacity, dangerous when hurt, etc. These symbols were personal markers, but visible for everyone to see when I wear a t-shirt. I checked their spelling online, and I was convinced that the symbols were correct. Last year I traveled in the East, and this was the first time when basically everyone in the street could understand or read my tattoos. Luckily, they confirmed the spelling, a huge relief, but they were somehow intrigued by my choice not only of Chinese as language, but for the reasons behind the specific choice of phrases. While there was general fascination with my tattoos, I could not help feeling somewhat awkward and exposed. And then he goes on by asking what could have gone wrong. And the first issue that comes to mind is the symbols could have been incorrect or contravened some cultural or grammatical norms. The symbols could have had negative connotations in the original context. For example, the symbol of buffalo. Some cultural purists may have felt that I overstepped cultural boundaries and appropriated another culture. See the recent outcry when a non-Maori woman had a mocha applied to her chin. There's a link to that if you want to check that out and then follow up on that. And Paul goes on to introduce a couple of potential issues maybe. And the first one is other instances of the use of Ubuntu in commercial informal contexts. Why would some of these be inappropriate? So there's the Ubuntu software operating system that probably many at Wikimania and elsewhere use. There's Ubuntu microfinance apparently. There's even an armed response and security services called Ubuntu. And there's an Ubuntu hairdressing salon. And if you look at the website, initially I thought the clientele would be people for African descent, people of African descent, but all the models on the website are white. When an international conference appropriate adopt a cultural value like Ubuntu, what happens can happen. If we accept the bona fide intentions of the conference organizers and consider Ubuntu as I am human because you make me human, or I am human because of you, what do you think informed the choice of the conference organizers? Taking at face value, how does the general notion of the centrality of humaneness, humaning as verb, and humanity inform open educational practices and resources? So that's from Paul. And on the slides, you can see his actual tattoos. I'm glad he shared those pictures with us. Taskeen, do you want to go next?
Yes, I'm happy to. Could you put my provocation up as well? So mine is a bit long, so I'll just talk you through the 4 points rather than reading it out. But the first one starts off with the fact that in the latest online and open education discussions, we've been talking about how are we going to include the marginalized into this open world? Like, how do we incorporate them in? And my question is, have we thought about whether they want to be included and whether it is congruent with their traditions and philosophies? And furthermore, basically, who is the we that is trying to include them? How does that play out in power dynamics? And is this sort of empowerment? Who's owning the power in this relationship? The second paragraph I sort of discuss, are we actually respecting different ways of knowing and different ways of sharing knowledge? So is openness inherently good? And I draw on some works from other people in terms of the First Nations or the Aboriginals, which in terms of sharing knowledge was shared with regard to gender or the sensitivity of information or tribal laws or status and age. So there's different reasonings of who should get access to what information. And then similarly in other African traditions, someone would almost have to study for almost 10 years before they could get access to certain levels of knowledge. So are we disrespecting cultures by just making everything open always? The next paragraph sort of deals with are we stripping Ubuntu of its true meaning when we reduce it to simply an African version of openness? And that links back to what I was saying earlier about taking Ubuntu as ahistorical and decontextualized. Then I also wanted to bring up, linking more similarly to Paul's provocation, is Ubuntu becoming a brand, some sort of commodification of culture, or like a virtue signaler that shows, like, look, we're progressive and we're moving towards this inclusive way, but is it actually embodying what Ubuntu means authentically? And I give the example here of Facebook Free Basics, which has Facebook has basically offered like a free version of Facebook, like a no data version in India. But I mean, the principle of this is to expand their user base. So by this idea of globalization, is it something that's just a capitalistic agenda at the end of the day? Yeah, and then the last paragraph, I just like sort of round up with asking, once we become more open and local and indigenous knowledges are included into this open space, who are the people that are going to benefit most from this? And normally it's the people who have the wealth and the power to be able to utilize these open knowledges. And that can often be done without the consent of the communities from where these knowledges came from. And I give one last sort of glimmer of hope in terms of a code of ethics that was drafted by the San people of South Africa in terms of how their knowledge should be used and how it can be shared, and sort of something it's just like a very ground up understanding of how they view their knowledge to be shared. I'll stop there for now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Taskeen and Christian, for those provocations. If we can just move to the next slide. So that we're sort of so we've got through to starting the discussions now. And what we'd like to do is to give everybody a particular question to respond to. So we've got the provocations. We've read them out. They are online, and we also have paper copies to give out now for the people here. And now we're going to, the online participants are going to go into their own online space, into breakout rooms. And we're going to do that here for about 15 minutes or so. And we just want to, for you to take one of the provocations. And once we get into the groups, we'll just say, can you do one or two? And say, in what ways, thinking about what we're doing now, in what ways might we be misappropriating or disrespecting cultures in harmful ways in our practices while we are striving towards opening and digitization of educational knowledge? So it's really a provocation. It's asking us to reflect perhaps on some of the practices that we might be doing, and hopefully provocations have given some stimulus. So that's where we'll stop now. So online people, if you want to mute yourselves, and then we will come back in the chat in about 15 minutes. Okay.
Okay, now we can't mute ourselves on your side. You have to just turn your volume down on your side and mute yourself, and then mute yourself like you were doing. Yeah. Because yeah, we can't talk if we mute ourselves, right?
Oh yeah, sorry, you can't talk to each other. Thank you for that. Aha's an old hand at this.
Yeah, she's a pro. We'll see you in 15 minutes. Looking forward to it.
Okay, thanks.
Reactions from our virtual participants. I know some people have already started responding in the text, but would someone like to speak aloud?
Are we going to break up into two groups, or are we happy with one group?
So we can do that if we think that should be an option, or that can be an option if we want to. So we would have groups of 6 if my count is right, and then meet again in like 10 or 12 minutes and convene again.
I was just asking. I wasn't saying we.
If it's gonna be random, you might find yourself ending up with all the facilitators in one session.
Yeah. Okay. Let's.
I think if we stay quiet, I think there's probably enough room for everyone to talk.
Okay. So let's stay together for now.
Hi, it's Jenny. I do have a comment, just because I read through the provocations prior to this, which is really great. So the slides were helpful, but related to Taskeen's provocation, I just wanted to articulate that I really struggle with the idea of inclusion as well, as a word and as a power hierarchy. Someone's including someone else, but I struggle with actually what to call it. So the concept for me is that I want to help, if people want my help, to magnify the amazing work of researchers and educators in South Africa and other marginalized places. But if it's not called inclusion, what might it be called? Whether I want it or not, whether I create it or not, there's definitely a power imbalance. I am also a post-colonial person. And so how do I work in research and education in a way that helps to magnify those who want to be magnified, because they're not. And that's just the reality of my situation in North America. I don't hear those voices. I don't see them in research publications, and I want to help. So if I don't call it inclusion, what else might I call it? Hi, Maha. I always ask, do they want, to the best of my ability, ask if people want to be magnified. I'm making an assumption that, and I don't think it's a bad assumption, that if someone publishes in a research publication, that they want their work to be seen and read. So rather than magnifying people personally necessarily, if something's published, then I'm making an assumption that they would want it to be seen by more people. And as I say, because I value those voices and I really appreciate those voices and the effort that it takes to get them published, I also want to share them.
So I'm curious to know, Jenny, what problems you have with the term inclusion.
I do agree with some critical voices that I've read that just simply saying I want to include people means that I'm in a privileged group and they are not. So that's really tricky. And it's taken me a while to kind of really understand that perspective. But I just don't know what the alternative is for me. I want to help empower people, but then that immediately implies that I have more power than they do.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. Empower is a word of imbalance, but inclusion, I'm curious about the sort of implied imbalance. You mean being included in something that is the central thing that people are being left out of, so that privileges it simply by suggesting that there is something to be included in. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, there's some privileged group, and they're inviting people into it. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Can I pick up on this idea in the chat of mutually constructed? Because I think that seems very relevant to the Wikipedia space particularly. But I've had a rather interesting experience in the last few months around Wikipedia, which was a little uncomfortable for me. And I'm still trying to work it through. Obviously there are different language Wikipedias, and a different language Wikipedia from English Wikipedia decided to make a point of always referring to place names in Scotland in Gaelic. And they saw that as an act of solidarity. And actually I don't, because if you come, as I do, from the southern part of Scotland, southeastern part of Scotland, Gaelic was never historically our language. And if you come from the northeastern part of Scotland, there is a very particular dialect there as well. And Gaelic was not part of our language. And many of us in Scotland struggle against this kind of twee, tartan, Highland kind of image of our country. And are trying actively to create a different sort of image. And the kind of the romanticisation and the Gallicisation of Scotland is a problem. And talking to my friend Lorna Campbell, who is from a Gaelic-speaking part of Scotland, of course she has a particular view of that language and its, the kind of historical annihilation of it, really. And so it's very geographically sensitive. And this other language, Wikipedia, didn't understand that. So in trying to mutually construct, something like Wikipedia, which is supposed to be this shared space of knowledge, all these same issues around local awareness and context are playing out over and again. And I don't really know how to tackle that. So I find this workshop particularly interesting because although we're talking about appropriation of an African term, it's playing out something I think we struggle with across the board. How do we meet each other in these mutually constructed spaces on equal footing?
Might there be a need to recognize that we don't all come into it at the same level of power, and that even when we're all in it, given similar amount of power, we still have different levels of power due to both our background, race, gender, personality, even position in the hierarchy?
Yes, I think that's true. It was a different language Wikipedia. I can't read what they've written. I only know that they chose to take this policy because they chose to say it in English. So there was an immediate, power balance thing going on there, and I don't know how far and wide and deep it goes because I can't read that other language either. So, yes, I think we will. If we want to meet in these mutually constructed spaces, we all have to, as you say, acknowledge that we all come to them from very different. We all come to these places from very different positions, so we don't all walk in the door together on a level playing field.
So that's such an interesting example. I mean, it's really great, Anne-Marie. I'm curious to know, what would you have preferred them to do?
Initially, seek some advice before making that kind of a policy.
Right.
Ask, we are thinking of doing this. Is this appropriate?
Right.
And I think, if I'm blunt, I think it was driven by some political ideology as well around nationalism and independence. The Gaelic language is very bound up in the independence argument here, and this was another nation who is also perhaps looking for independence, and language activism through Wikipedia and constructing knowledge about yourself and your own language on Wikipedia plays into quite a lot of the politics of independence in certain regions. Basque Wikipedia, Catalonian Wikipedia, Welsh Wikipedia, and arguably Scots or Gaelic Wikipedia as well, or the Irish Gaelic Wikipedia. So they are very politically intense spaces.
Yeah, no, I think your point about ask first is a really excellent point. But the question is, then who do you ask? Because there is no, I mean, what you've highlighted so well is there's no homogenous community.
There isn't a homogenous community, but I suppose one of the strengths of Wikipedia, and also perhaps sometimes one of its failings, is the process of negotiation that exists for working some of these things out. There are fairly well-defined processes of proposing something, debating something, coming to a conclusion. Now, sometimes that debate's not a particularly pleasant thing, but I think there is a negotiation process inherent in that community that allows a number of voices in. It's not perfect, but I struggle to see what else would be, because there can't be a single authority. It has to be a process of letting many voices in and negotiating your way through it.
One of the things I also struggle with this inclusion, and like Maha and I were mentioning, participation as an alternative, but even participation can be problematic, because a lot of the time, let's say if you're talking about gender violence in a community and women speak up and then you leave, and then there's a whole lot of problems that have emerged because you've brought up these issues, and people's voices have been heard, but that might endanger them or lead to other problems. So sometimes even that, or like something versus having all voices heard versus respecting authority or hierarchy in a community, like, is that something that's supposed to be dismantled, or is that something that is supposed to be respected? I don't know, all of these things confuse me in terms of how you respect something, and how our ideas of how something should be democratic might be different from other people's understandings of how things should be.
Well, maybe in the silence, I'll jump in with a question or two. I think one of the things I'm always perpetually concerned about is the many ways in which openness, especially in the way that it has this sort of adulation and fervor around it, is weaponized. And that's especially true more recently, I think, with examples in the case of traditional knowledge, where it does have this sort of colonial echo, where people are told, yes, you should share, yes, you should openly license your work, but it's really a one-way flow of information that benefits the more powerful. And I think Taskine's provocation glanced at that idea, certainly. So one of the things I've been really happy about in that sense is the development of TK or traditional knowledge licenses. But even so, I'm concerned that with, again, the best of intentions, which I think only provides a limited cover in that sense. You can't always plead ignorance and have that be enough. But whether it's public scholarship with students and what the default setting is as we're asking them to share their work, what the license is for what the community considers to be open enough, and that includes the sort of derogatory comments that we tend to see when people apply a license that's less than what might be considered a free cultural works license for authentic reasons. I'm concerned about the weaponization of openness in this space, especially with the less powerful.
So just to echo maybe the point of politics coming to play and being in play all the time is just anecdotal. Basically, whenever you speak to someone who's engaged in open education in Germany or very often Central Europe, you will find them quite surprised when you tell them that lots of, for example, the North American views and key players in the open education leaders are libertarian, maybe even, or have a certain background that they wouldn't even connect to open in general. So very often they are what you would call in North America the central left, maybe, or like and think of the commons as a common good that should be protected, as many have voiced. And this is, I find this interesting because this is only like my context, and I would be interested in what others have to say on that. But having these politics come into play, even when you don't notice it, they do something with whatever it is that you're working on. And I'd like to hear more about that as well.
Um, I, I thought I just wanted to share something that I've been thinking about in my research in decolonization and the stuff that I've been working with in different rural areas in South Africa. They don't really understand decolonization or the need for it. And it's quite interesting because then I'm this external person that thinks that I know better, that they need a decolonized education, and I'm trying to enforce it, whereas the people on the ground don't see a need for it, and they're focused more on basic needs and just an access to any education. And I guess my problem or my predicament right now is how much of it do I decide I think that I know better to guide them into this more Africanized or more decolonized education, or should I respect that they don't, or well, I do respect it, but maybe I in some way think that they don't know what they don't know. And so somehow it needs to be a balance of a thought from outside their bubble versus respecting what they understand from within. I don't know if I'm making sense. This is still thoughts that I'm working on.
That does make complete sense to me. There's something about context, and again, it's something I struggle with personally. In a UK sense, Scotland would consider itself to be post-colonial. Our relationship to Westminster and the sort of centres of power in the UK is very problematic. But then you consider Scotland's context to the world, and you consider the history of colonialisation, and you consider particularly the Scottish experience in colonialisation. We were far more active, and disproportionately larger numbers of Scottish people per head of population were involved in the process of colonialisation. So there's two really difficult. I'm in this one position with these two very difficult perspectives. In one sense, I feel oppressed, and in another sense, I have historically been part of oppression. So I think what you're describing about negotiating those conversations always has to start with the context that you're coming from, and that it's not even a single context, that there's that it's a messy space. And you're if I may say so, being educated in the UK, to go back and talk in an African context, what has that done? How has that changed you? What knowledge are you taking, and how do you sort out what's appropriate? I don't know. It seems it's something I'm struggling to pick through as well. Like, how do I carry this historical baggage, and how do I carry this current state and work through the two things and not have them interfere with each other?
Sorry about that. Hi, online people. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Yeah. Hi.
Okay, great. We can hear you as well.
Perfect.
Okay. How was the discussion online? Cool. Okay, great. So I think what we'll do is normally, what would be nice is, we got into 3 groups here in the on site, and I'm not going to ask people to kind of summarize everything for their group necessarily, but we'd like if somebody from each group could have a reflection or some feedback on what transpired, or whether there was some discussion. Ideally, if you could come here, then the online people will be able to hear you. Otherwise, we can try bringing the mic to you, and then it might get picked up by the speakers. Is anyone brave enough to volunteer and come up? Yeah, thank you. And maybe if you could talk about which provocation you talked about. Thank you.
We just did the sort of number 1, and but I think one of the sort of counter examples that I thought about was there are tribes, indigenous tribes in the Amazon, Brazilian Amazon, that more or less hide from civilization, and the Brazilian government is working to help them, you know, maintain their separateness. So, you know, I mean, we don't want to force them to be part of the larger world community. We want to, if we're going to be inclusive, we need to invite them and respect what, you know, whether they want to join or not, right?
Thank you. Thank you. Anybody else on site here like to come and share? Okay, thank you. Someone is coming up. A little bit of peer persuasion.
Right, okay, so we talked about the issue of cultural appropriation, essentially. I know even the term is actually quite conflictual and critiqued one, but it was about the matter originally, the story of the Chinese tattoos and whether it's okay to sort of, you know, embrace parts of a different culture that might even be very much connected to resistance symbols, and whether we as the rather privileged ones should just adapt those, and where the lines are. Is it okay as long as it's sort of a naive but maybe goodwill sort of sign of admiration? Is even that not okay? Because fundamentally it means, yet again, we're just sort of blindly stealing from people that we really owe more interest to, more learning to, more interest in their culture. We haven't really found a definite vote on that. I think everyone agrees, you know, ideally just show yourself, to be open, learn about where you go. If anything, this conference is all about embracing that, and yeah, just being open and being willing to listen.
Thank you very much. And is there anybody else who'd like to talk? Not gonna. Yeah. Okay, never mind. That's great. Thank you. Christian, we'll move on to the online now. So if I don't know how you guys want to do it, but I'll hand over to you. Okay.
Hi, I'm Anne-Marie. I think I've been volunteered by the group to try and report back on what was a really complex conversation, and I'm not sure how well I'll do, so please forgive me. But we didn't split into two groups. We kind of thought about both of the provocations together. And our conversation ended up taking us into talking about sort of power and imbalance and context. So thinking about when we are trying to be open, are we all coming from the same place? Do we all have the same sort of level of power? Are we on a level playing field or not? And I think the answer was not. And are we all coming from the same cultural contexts? Well, no. And so how do we negotiate those difficulties or those imbalances, lack of cultural knowledge, lack of cultural sensitivity, and not end up appropriating or not end up kind of almost, I think Rajiv used the phrase weaponizing open, using it in ways that are extractive or exploitative because we lack some sort of cultural sensitivity or understanding, or aren't cognizant of our own position of power relative to other people. And we talked about that a little bit in relation to Wikipedias and other activities, particularly in the Canadian context and South African context with truth and reconciliation processes, and perhaps some of the values underpinning those processes as well. Yeah, does anybody else want to jump in? There's a few comments coming up on the chat.
Yeah, I think that a lot of our conversation was about intersectionality, and there were some really good examples about having to negotiate quite contradictory positions. And I think that's really important to acknowledge and to surface. And the examples really illuminated that.
Is there anything anybody else wants to add? Or are we done? I get the feeling we could just keep talking, so that might be a problem.
Jenny, did you want to add something on inclusion, or shall I go about the process?
Yes, yeah, sure, Maha. I really just wanted to talk about inclusion as a word representing a concept that's really important to me, which is the support and listening marginalized voices, especially in open education research, because I learned so much, but don't see it as often as I want to from South Africa and from Egypt and from everywhere else, where there's great research going on. And so I just struggle with the word inclusion itself, because it implies a power hierarchy. And I'm looking for an alternative that can reflect more what I feel, which is just valuing everyone's knowledge and sharing everyone's knowledge if they want it to be shared in a way that helps to enrich everyone's understanding of the types of things we're talking about.
Okay, and one of the other things we talked about as a group is that we need to be able to acknowledge and surface the contradictions and be willing to sit with and embrace them, embrace that discomfort. And this doesn't mean not working towards improvement or doing something better, but always knowing that whatever we come up with will always be partial and incomplete and problematic. I just wanted to make a very quick comment on the process of this, is that in a small way, I feel like the virtual folks were privileged. I don't know what's happening in the room. I don't know if people in the room know each other, but a lot of us on the virtual side, at least a lot of us know some of the people in the room. So we were able, I think, to go really deep into the conversation really quickly, because there was this, we've already been talking about these things in other places on Twitter or whatever. And we were also lucky that we had both of the provocateurs in our team. So we could actually get them to also elaborate on some of what they said. So that was also a little bit, yes, and definitely the virtual folks are self-selecting. They've taken time away from their day. They didn't jump in here by mistake, for example. I don't know if people in the room were there in the room on purpose or it was just one of the sessions that was there. So I'd love to hear how that was and whether people knew each other, how that helped the conversation and made it a little bit harder to get deep very quickly.
Okay, great. Thanks, Maha, and thanks, virtual people. That's a really great question in terms of the process. And I don't know if anybody would like to say anything about how they found this process of working in a group with maybe people you don't know. If anyone has any comments, certainly we could see discussions going. Anybody want to add anything? Last thing, somebody gave a thumbs up. Yeah, okay. I think we're coming to the end of the session with our time. So I'm going to just wrap up quickly and just say thank you very, very much to everyone who participated, and also to my fellow workshop planners. It's quite difficult planning a workshop like this with sort of 6-7 people, and that we were trying to do it in this online hybrid format. And I really want to give a big shout out to the technical support here who actually got us going, because an hour before we didn't think we would. And it's a bit hairy doing this kind of thing in terms of the process. So thank you very much, everybody, and have a great rest of the conference. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, and just dropping in, sorry if that is rude now, but a big thank you to Sakena as well for including us. I know that's tough work, and I've seen the technical team going at this for like 90 minutes or something like that. So big thank you from, I think I can speak for all of us in that case to say thank you for even including us from all kinds of places all over the world. Thanks.
Okay, great. Thank you. And Christian, we'll log off now, but I guess you guys can carry on because you don't have to vacate a room or anything. So, okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Someday we will create a handbook for hybrid conference presentations so that not every single time we have to work this out just before.
I think that's part of it, though. Every time the problem manifests in a different way, or it's a different scenario. So,
but it is so worth doing. So, I really think it's such a rich format.
I would completely help you with that. It's something I need practically on the ground, or will fairly shortly. So yeah, count me in.
I think among all the different types of products that we have tried, I feel like Zoom is one of the most stable and one of the most straightforward to use. I mean, as Teskeen acknowledges the technological problems on any given day, any given space are all different. But I'm really finding a lot of success with Zoom in global conversations, which I'm really excited about.
Yeah, I agree, except that I have no idea why my video didn't work. So other than that, it worked really well.
I'm guessing, Laura, that it's not a built-in camera. So there's something related to the setup of your webcam. Is that right?
No,
it's not built into your laptop.
There's a built-in camera in the computer. So with Skype and other things, it works automatically. So I have no idea why it's not working now. But I mean, it's not everyone's problem. It's just I would have loved to agree with Jenny that Zoom works perfectly, but it's always something.
You know, there's next to the stop video, there's an arrow and it says camera, and there's a video settings.
Yeah.
Maybe there's something happening there.
Yeah.
I've never used it.
Yeah, I'll have a look through it. I'll see if I can find out why. Okay.
I think it might also be because the pop-up on your screen was about a Malta. Maybe that's interfering with the Slack if you're disabled.
What's a Malta?
I think that was what I think it's I think it's something that's installed on your computer, because that was the pop-up that came up on our side.
Oh, okay, cool. All right, well, I'll follow it up, because other than that, I agree with Jenny that Zoom has been more stable than any of these other things like Google Hangouts or Skype or any of those. So Christian, clearly people don't want to stop talking.
I'm completely fine with that. That's basically all I do all day. So I now have an apology to do it online. And I don't think the connection of, great, Paul. I don't think this group of people doesn't, even though we're used to each other, we don't see each other often enough. So just keep on going. I will just stop recording now, if that's okay for all of you.